Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. I am Maria Perbellini, Dean of the School of Architecture and Design at New York Tech, and it's my absolute pleasure on behalf of the university and our school to welcome an outstanding group of guests from prestigious universities and architecture practices. The theme of the event and our distinguished speakers will be further introduced by Professor Tom Verebes, and at the end we will have a discussion moderated by Giovanni Santamaria, Chairman of the Architecture Department of our school. This symposium, Urbanism of the Southern China Metropolis, is for us a great opportunity for collaboration with Tsinghua University, Graduate School of Architecture in Shenzhen, China, and particularly I would like to extend a warm welcome and recognize among other presenters, of course, that we will introduce later, Professor Shu-Wei Guo, from Tsinghua University, is the Executive Dean of Future Human Habitats Research Institute, University Shenzhen International Graduate School, and also Gao Yan, Principal Architect of HCD Idea Design and Research and Associate Professor at Tsinghua University. Thank you for being with us. I know it's very early in the morning in your country, so we are absolutely delighted to have you with us tonight. We will explore the fast transformation of the Pearl River Delta region, also known as the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau, Greater Bay Area of the southern China, from an extensively rural territory to a complex mix of urbanization, industrial growth, and agriculture. Southern China has attracted massive migration, worldwide investments, and the interest and involvement of architects in China and abroad. Experts in practice and academia with related work will contribute to a conversation and reflection on the history of this rapidly developing urban transformation and present conditions and possible futures. And I now open the floor to Professor Tom Verebes. A special thank you goes to Tom for helping with the organization of this amazing symposium, and is also one of the panelists with his amazing work. And thank you to the lecture series and committee, series and event committee for the essential contribution. Thank you, and Tom, they are all yours.
Thank you very much, Dean. I'm grateful for the support for this event. I will share my screen and fumble around for the right part of my screen. Let's, getting there. You should now see only, one moment. I'm just adjusting what you see. So you now should only see, no, not yet. Sorry, forgive me. There we go. Okay. I'm going to introduce this event in a way that I'll introduce it a little bit discursively first, and then I will make a great comparison between the host cities and perhaps my contribution as well. I'm grateful for your support, Maria, as Dean of the school, and also Chair Santa Maria for your moderation after the presentations, and really for all of you to join here from the Far East and from around New York, inside and outside New York, and to all of our guests as well, students, alumni, public. This event is a collaboration between the School of Architecture and Design at NYIT and Tsinghua University Shenzhen International Graduate School, which is a new venture for Tsinghua University in Beijing, one of the world's top universities, setting up a new entire campus in Shenzhen. We're honored to host this joint symposium between our two institutions. And it's genuinely an honor to have Dean Shui Guo and Professor Gao Yan joining us from Shenzhen today, and really all of the presenters. I will introduce everyone at the end of this so that it's a little bit more fresh in everybody's mind and with much more detail than necessarily the credentials that you see on screen right now. The title of this event requires a footnote as an explanation, I think. In his book, The Rise of the Network Society, published in 1996, Manuel Castells writes about the Pearl River Delta, and he refers to what he calls, what he named, the Southern China metropolis. And he states that the Southern China metropolis will likely become the most representative urban face of the 21st century. And with reference to Castells' prediction the status of the PRD nearly a quarter of a century later, which we can validate as quite an accurate prediction simply by hosting a symposium with all these wonderful participants on the very theme of the Southern China metropolis. On the left is an academic proposal worked on together with Un-Suk Choi, joining us here tonight, and myself, along with 11 other graduate students working as a large group for a proposal for a 64 square kilometer master plan for an extension of Haikou City and Hainan Island. This was done in 93, 94. Early in the days of, say, the urbanization of China, and very much early in the days of both the careers of Un-Suk and myself. This project was exhibited in the Cities on the Move exhibition at the Hayward Gallery in London, curated by Hans Ulrich Obrist, and very much at the start of his curatorial career. And the exhibition took its impetus from the change, flux, and the specificities of Asian cities at the cusp of the 21st century. Let's just do some key dates in a brief history of Southern China's development. In 1979, Chairman Deng Xiaoping enunciated "to be rich is glorious" and initiated a policy titled the Open Door Policy, declaring China's openness to the world. On the left is Chairman Deng and his crew reviewing China merchants' ambitious proposals for developing Shenzhen. And on the right is a contemporary billboard, a photo I took in 2018, celebrating the ambition and achievements of Chairman Deng. In 1980, the first special economic zone was established in Shenzhen, nestled up to the border of Hong Kong, at the time still under colonial rule, Hong Kong was, by the United Kingdom. This brought about market-oriented reform, and the Pearl River Delta became the economic powerhouse that it became in the 80s and 90s. In 1980, the first special economic zone was, after it's established, it's growing, the Pearl River Delta became delimited to foreign investment, which meant that foreigners were able to invest. This led to a huge manufacturing boom and massive urbanization. In 1997, Hong Kong was handed back to China from 1984, when Maggie Thatcher and Deng Xiaoping negotiate the return of Hong Kong. And increasingly, Hong Kong is drawn into the economic fold of Southern China, providing massive opportunities for investment. In 2019, the development plan for the Guangdong-Hong Kong-Macao Greater Bay Area is released. After 4 decades of reform and opening up of China to the world, the motivation of this overt rebranding of the Pearl River Delta is twofold. One, to recapitulate the role of Southern China in China's national economic development, and secondly, to cohere the geopolitical position of Southern China within the country's global ambitions. So a little bit of urban geography of China's urban metropolitan regions. The Greater Bay Area comprises 9 cities in the Pearl River Delta in Guangdong Province, plus the 2 special administrative regions of Hong Kong and Macau. The population of Guangdong Province is 115 million, roughly the same area as Texas, but 10 times the population. And it was largely a rural territory with a complex mix of urbanization, industry, and agriculture. Now the Greater Bay Area, it's difficult to put a number on it, but it's somewhere in the region of about 50 million, and all of the province plus Hong Kong and Macau are 120 million or so. The term city is clearly outmoded due to its imprecision to describe these urban entities. The Pearl River Delta, together with Jingjingji at the top of these diagrams, Beijing, Tianjin, ringed by Hebei Province, and the Yangtze River Delta, including Shanghai and several other cities in the east of China, they represent a truly unprecedented leap in the extent of urbanization having been achieved in such a regional scale in such a short time. The population figures that you're reading on your screens are truly astronomical. The territories are vast. And an important aside in this story is that in the year 1800, 220 years ago, Beijing was the largest city in the world with a population of 1 million. One last urban geography diagram before we move on to maybe more interesting visuals. These urban metropolitan regions also include the US Northeast Corridor, New York and its cities surrounding it or nearby, and then Northwest Europe and coastal California. So this is what they look like, another way of capturing them from 215 kilometers high on Google Earth. This is the Greater Bay Area in southern China, the Tokyo Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, and the New York Bay Area. And it's clear that the southern China Greater Bay Area is also targeted to rival or become greater than the world-class other Bay Areas such as Tokyo, New York, and San Francisco. Certainly it is already in population. In terms of architectural culture in China and about or on China, I believe really so much of the architectural culture that's existed over the last 2 decades or so in China is largely to be thanked Professor Xu as being the leading force, a co-curator of the legendary Architecture Beijing Biennale events in Beijing in 2004, 6, 8, and 2010. And his instigation and initiative brought together a generation of both emerging and established architects to China, as well as really showcasing the world's leading schools, emphasizing experimentation, transnational associations between shared research interests. These are really wonderful events, and we owe Professor Xu a great thank you for your achievements. In other sort of documentation of this area, in particular southern China, in 1996, Rem Koolhaas and his project on the city at the GSD begins a research project on the Pearl River Delta, and he publishes this vast book called The Great Leap Forward. It's an enthusiastic photojournalistic reportage which creates an anthropological, economic, and architectural spectacle of southern China, focusing on really the sensation of unrelenting rapid urbanization in this region. The Chinese Dream was a major research endeavor by Neville Mars and Adrian Hornsby, capturing the phenomenon of hundreds of millions of Chinese people flocking to cities, chasing what they called the Chinese Dream. And the AD issue, New Urban China, focused on the process and product of China's unprecedented urbanization, with cities often being built from scratch in 3 to 5 years. The China gazing continued with serious research and several other books, publications such as The Concrete Dragon, which attempted to make sense of this history of this moving target of China's urbanization. Rogovin and Holshoff named their insightful book after Mr. Sun, a farmer, and how his nearby city migrated to his farm, and he ends up being a wealthy property developer. My former colleague, Stefan Al, has a series of books on China and factory towns of Guangdong, the casino complexes of Macau, the malls of Hong Kong, and urban villages of Shenzhen. And another former colleague, Zhuandu, rectifies what she believes to be the myth of Shenzhen being planned on a tabula rasa erasure, where the rural past has no significant impact on the urban present. She smashes the conception that there was nothing there in terms of all of those villages became urbanized, and she sort of tracks and maps that history of what existed before the city. And we're blessed to have here with us today two of the most important scholars on the changing nature as well as the enduring qualities of the Chinese city. Professor Graham Shane wrote an invaluable chapter on Chinese urbanism, capturing the emerging phenomenon of urbanization at the time of publishing in 2011. And also joining us is Professor Li-Shi Chao, whose insights on the specificities of the Chinese city and its remarkable distinctions to cities elsewhere are captured in his book, Understanding the Chinese City. And in my own research into paradigms, methods, media of urbanism, my interest into the city as a set of complex adaptive systems was really very heavily influenced by the rapidly changing context of Southern China and living in Hong Kong for 11 years. And in addition, my guest edited AD issue, Mass Customized Cities, was triggered very much by the specificities of urban identity in a context being built through standardized, ubiquitous modes of production. So the fun part of my presentation, I'm going to try to make a comparison, draw parallels, synergies and similarities between the two cities of our host institutions, respectively New York and Shenzhen. I'm going to try to convince everybody how these two cities are so similar. I could probably equally possibly demonstrate how they're wonderfully distinct and different from each other as well. Just to recap, both cities are urban metropolitan regions, Greater Bay Area of Southern China on the left, and on the right, New York's Greater Bay Area. Both New York and Shenzhen are instant cities in their time. Here a view in 1861 on the left, looking north on 2nd Avenue at 42nd Street, and an aerial photo of the Times Square area around 42nd Street in 2020, still lit up, but almost as empty as the drawing on the left. Unprecedented urbanization at a speed and sustained rate had occurred in Shenzhen in 1/4 of the time of New York over the past 40 years, compared with New York, which has had a 160-year history since the start of its era of urbanization. Both are coastal cities, although climatically and ecologically not so similar. Shenzhen is a subtropical, not geographically. Shenzhen is partly mountainous. Both share the same concerns for rising seas, as they both set along complex waterfronts of rivers, delta regions, and open sea. On the left is the Big U, a proposal for mitigating the risks of flooding on the edge of land and water in lower Manhattan by Big. And on the right is an aerial photo of Shenzhen Bay at Shekou. Let's arrive to the ground in this kind of photojournalistic journey. Here is Central Park under construction in the 1850s, and Shekou district in the west of Shenzhen, one of the earlier areas of Shenzhen to be developed, is under construction in the 1980s with a massive land reclamation effort, trading mountains for flat coastal land. And this is the coastline we just saw in the previous slide on the right. New York City and Shenzhen are both cities of immigrants. Almost entirely non-indigenous populations live in both cities and settled both cities. New York immigrants from all over come from all corners of the world. And here's Ellis Island on the left and the view of New York City as people would arrive. And on the right is a Foxconn factory making our iPhones. And similarly, people arrived to Shenzhen from all over China, mostly initially to work in their factories in the past. And Shenzhen is what you can say is China's melting pot and its New World city. Industrialization has always acted as a catalyst for urbanization. On the left is the Dumbo area of Brooklyn and the Manhattan Bridge on the left under construction in 1909, and the atmospheric haze of China's industrialization hanging in the air over Shenzhen on the right. As is a pattern with the transitions of early industrial cities in the West, the robust economic ones, Shenzhen has also transited from a manufacturing city to host a robust financial market focusing on technology. Here's OMA's Shenzhen Stock Exchange completed in 2013. So New York City is largely a post-industrial city today, represented here on the left with Dumbo again, and the view of refurbished post-industrial lofts and offices and Manhattan Bridge. And on the right is OCT Loft, a drawing of OCT Loft, which has emerged from a disused 1980s factory area, regenerated as a creative community. I'll just show a few slides of this. Interconnecting buildings, buildings that look like 50s modernism, but are actually built in the 80s as industrial strips of factories. They now host creative professionals, their offices, galleries, retail, restaurant, and bars. A detail of its hip architectural armature and some of its cafes and restaurants. So the post-industrial transitions of both cities have occurred decades apart, of course, yet both cities emerge as cities of culture. The building of institutions for existing or growing collections is contrasted in Shenzhen by a boom of building institutions for the visual arts. On the left, of course, is Frank Lloyd Wright's Guggenheim Museum and Coop Himmelblau's Contemporary Museum of Art in Shenzhen. Both New York and Shenzhen are logistic hubs for shipping. New York, until the past century, had the entire waterfront perimeter of Manhattan was lined with shipping, a ring of maritime industry. And on the right is Shenzhen Port at Yantian, on the east side of the city. Altogether, the 11 ports between Hong Kong and Shenzhen account for over 10% of the world's shipping. Cities tend to reinvent themselves through investment into innovation. And our school at New York Tech has an entrepreneurial and technology-focused set of interests in research and pedagogy. And in this light, we're very much in synergy with the motivations of urban innovation hubs, such as the Brooklyn Navy Yards on the left. And on the right is Tencent's Shenzhen headquarters. Tencent is the group behind WeChat, QQ, and all things internet in China. In Delirious New York, Rem Koolhaas referred to buildings being rebuilt on the same site, larger and taller, reusing and integrating parts of the disused or older building, the elevator cores, for example. He referred to this as tantamount to a form of architectural cannibalism, buildings eating other buildings and growing ever more large and vertical. This is also a feature of Shenzhen, building and rebuilding ever taller. In New York, the physical material heritage of the city's architecture and its limit of its ancient urban fabric is reasonably preserved, here as an example in the West Village. And I really love this moment where the early grid meets the commissioner's plan grid in the West Village. The phenomenon of the urban village in particular is particular to Shenzhen, although they exist elsewhere in China, not to this extent nor scale. These enclaves are pockets of residual older fabric, built and rebuilt on territories of existing villages in the Delta, sort of rural agricultural region of Shenzhen previously. And over 800 of these villages are distributed throughout Shenzhen. They're super dense, pedestrian-oriented enclaves, and they're now residential areas for the endless flows of new migrants from all over China. And many are gentrifying quickly. I would keep an eye on these spaces. They are to be ultimately the history that will be preserved of Shenzhen, and they're absolutely the coolest areas of the city. urbanization does still and always had an inextricable relationship to experimentation with new innovations in technology and infrastructure. New York had the train and its terminus as its monument, here at Grand Central Station on the left, and the Hong Kong-Macao-Zhuhai Bridge, along with 4 other bridges across the mouth and interior of the vast Pearl River on the right. Speaking of enclaves, although the Manhattan grid maintained the limit of a single architectural entity to one Manhattan block for much of the history of the city, resisting the superblock for a very long time, Rockefeller Center was the first New York development to include several blocks, and Shenzhen has rolled out the superblock, mega block development pattern of infrastructure present in just about every Chinese city, as the basis of its armature of and for an enclave form of urbanism. In New York, Central Park is delineated as a vast patch of designed and simulated wilderness. In the 1990s and 2000s in Shenzhen, large, literally armies of landscape gardeners were deployed to plant out all residual spaces of the car-based infrastructure of the city. In the city's subtropical ecological context, everything grew and is mature, and it is the garden city but without a population limit. So just very briefly, a little bit of some of the history of my work and practice on southern China or in southern China. We did an exhibition project for the Hong Kong Shenzhen Biennale in 2009 titled Parametric Pearl River Delta. And we documented sets of urban and architectural information related to 11 cities in Guangdong Province and the 9 cities in the province and 2 others, the 11 cities that comprise now the Greater Bay Area. And we coded a back-end computational model to be used in the front end on screen as an interface for visitors to design their own city. That project and this one as well was worked on together with Gao Yan. And this was our entry for an international competition for the terminus and passport ID control and customs for the Hong Kong side of the Hong Kong-Macao-Zhuhai Bridge, which the bridge is built, and the winning entry is also built for this landing point. In our proposal for the Lantyang crossing between Hong Kong and Shenzhen, this is another border crossing, a land border rather than the bridge. We proposed to confront the dichotomous characteristics of the Hong Kong side being a green border and the Shenzhen side being built up as an urban edge. The scheme accommodates the criteria for a two-way flow of 175,000 people per day. And a comprehensive energy scheme was developed. Footsteps of the mass of people, of the 175,000 people, would generate electricity. Rainwater collection was put in. Passive temperature control embedded into the spatial organization and layers of performative materials. And lastly, Hong Kong was my home for 11 years. And the Seoul Biennale had invited my practice to contribute, and we produced a piece of research on Hong Kong using drone photography, video, and photogrammetry scanning. And this is a model scanned of the Wafu estate in Pak Phu Lam in Hong Kong. And thanks to our dean's support, it was exhibited also, this project and lots of its documentations of large format printing and video was exhibited in the Ed Hall Gallery in our Long Island campus before COVID hit. And one detail image, this is a temperature map. Black and purple is the cooler temperatures, and yellow to white is the hottest, a different way of reading the urbanism from the air. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce in sequence of the presentations our presenters. I'll introduce everybody together rather than going back and forth, so you see the faces and the titles. First presenting is Shui Guo, who is a professor and former chair of the architecture department at the School of Architecture at Tsinghua University. And recently he's taken on an exciting new role as executive dean of Future Urban Habitats, the research institute at Tsinghua University, Shenzhen International Graduate School. He's the director of the Digital Architecture Design Association, DADA. Professor Xu is a pioneer architect who's dedicated his career to innovation in architecture and construction through robotics, AI, 3D printing, more recently. He completed a 3D printed concrete bridge, which is the world's longest printed concrete pedestrian bridge. Professor Xu has published more than 140 papers and published 17 books. He's lectured worldwide. He's taught at MIT, SciArc, and USC. As I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation earlier on, he was the curator for the seminal Architectural Beijing Biennale events in 2004, 6, 8, and 10. David Graham Shane is an architect and urbanist. He studied at the Architecture Association in London and Cornell for his MArch, and then did his PhD with Colin Rowe at Cornell. He taught at the AA in the 70s and at Columbia since the 1980s, teaching in the urban design program since 1991. He's lectured widely and has published several prominent books: Recombinant Urbanism, Urban Design and City Theory, Urban Design since 1945, A Global Perspective. And I'm looking forward to his essay, which is the same title of, Graham, your presentation today, the Great Bay Public Space, A Century of Continuity and Change in the Pearl River Delta, 1920 to 2020. Eun-Suk Choi is an architectural designer and a director at KPF with a diversity of experience, including retail, residential, office, and institutional projects throughout Europe, the United States, and Asia. Eun-Suk has worked on or led most of KPF's projects in Shenzhen, a total of 25 built projects in Shenzhen, I understand. And since joining KPF in 1996, she's worked on both the design and management aspects of many high-profile projects and competition-winning entries. Eun-Suk received her professional degree in architecture in Seoul, and then joined the A graduate design program for her post-professional grad school degree. Gao Yan received a B.Arch at Tsinghua University and an M.Arch from the AA, and is currently a PhD candidate in the HDR program at RMIT. His past academic positions include program director at a visiting school and a professoriate position at the University of Hong Kong. He's co-founder of IDEA Design in Hong Kong and Shenzhen, and associate professor at the Shenzhen International Graduate School. He's won numerous international awards and received a 40 Under 40 award in 2014. Jeffrey Raven is associate professor here at NYIT, former director of the MS in Urban Design and Urban and Regional Design program. He is principal of Raven Architecture and Urban Design, co-chair of AA New York Planning and Urban Design Committee. His specialization is sustainable and resilient urban design. He's worked on projects in the Arabian Gulf, India, China, Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, Africa, the US. He's highly published and has received several NSF grants. Li Shichao is Whedon Professor in Asian Architecture at the School of Architecture at UVA, University of Virginia, where he teaches history, theory, and design of architecture and directs the PhD in the Constructed Environment program. He completed his PhD in London with Mark Cousins and a professor at a former professor at the Chinese University in Hong Kong for several years before joining UVA. He's authored many books, Understanding the Chinese City, Architecture and Modernization, Power and Virtue, and Architecture and Intellectual Change in England, 1650 to 1730. Esther Lawrence is a licensed architect an assistant professor at the University of Virginia. Her work explores the social, cultural, and political and economic preconditions of architecture and the mutual effects between architectural and urban formations and cultural practices, social relations, spatial perceptions, with a focus on Chinese urbanization and the city of Hong Kong. Together with Li Shichao, she's the editor of Kowloon Cultural District, an investigation into spatial capabilities in Hong Kong, and author of Typological Drift, Emerging Cities in China. I would now like to introduce our first speaker, Professor Xu Guo, Executive Dean of Tsinghua's Future Urban Habitats Research Institute, who will present his paper on future urban human habitats and intelligent construction. Welcome, Professor Xu.
Thank you, Tom, and Dean Maria for offering this great opportunity to for us to exchange our ideas. We'll share a screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes. If you, yeah, that's right, yeah.
The topic of my presentation is future human habitats and intelligent construction. Future human habitats, in fact, it's a new research institute in Tsinghua Shenzhen International Graduate School. There are 7 disciplines in 6. One of the 7 is the future human habitats. The future human habitats in 6 is based on the cross connection of architecture and the related disciplines in the 21st century, focusing on the frontiers of the future human settlement space, treasuring design thinking as the core innovation power and devoting to create more intelligent and more sustainable built environment. Future human habitats in 6 will be built as a global think tank in the field, giving full play to Shenzhen's unique advantages of urban development practice, gathering the world's latest design thinking and human living concepts, and creating and propagating the most inspiring knowledge of the human habitats. I could say it has 3 basic characteristics. One of them is multidisciplinary integration and collaboration around the core of design thinking. Second, close integration with the major frontier issues of international and domestic human habitats development. Third, close integration with Shenzhen's representative development practice. And the program has started this year with 23 students. And these students work at Master of Architecture degree through 2 years start. And the key research direction of the future human habitats discipline will emphasize the characteristics of cutting-edge, technical, future-oriented, multidisciplinary conjunction. There are 1 research center and 3 research areas in the institute. The research center has been named the Global Innovation Center on Design Thinking for Future Habitats. And the 3 research areas include future urban science and supporting technology system, research on digital architecture and intelligent construction, innovation center in technological humanities for human habitats. And myself is in the area of research on digital architecture and intelligent construction. And this research direction will be based on the deeper involvement of big data, 3D printing, AI technology in the urban and architecture area. The large-scale 3D printing technology of using composite materials such as wood and palm, and economic building materials such as concrete will be studied. And the digital city design, digital building design, and their evaluation method and technologies will also be investigated based on the data analysis, algorithm generation, and computational simulation, starting from the demands of the future human habitat. It will also focus on establishment of scalable software and hardware platforms and updating of the corresponding architectural knowledge structure, providing new methods and tools for future urban planner, architects, builders, and managers. And next, we'll have a brief introduction to our research on intelligent construction, especially in the 3D printing concrete. First, we developed a printing system based on the robotic arm. Generally the printing system is the truss system, or just like the truss system with 3 axes could go X, Y, Z, but use the robotic arm, it could be printed in space. And second, we developed a printing head, which could continue long-time printing, and also develop printing material, concrete material, especially the material ratio is very important for the printing. And also we printed a control system, we developed a printing control system which combined pedestrian generator and the control program of the robotic system. After we set this mechanical system, and we have some testing printing. And this is the piece of the wall printing. And this is a big scale components of the building printing. And we also printed we could do color printing and could printing texture of the different pattern. And we also did some furniture printing. This is a chair, and this is a chair for children. And this is a curved chair, and this is a sculpture. And this is some flower box. And this is a tripod, and this is a trash can. And this is the sitting table. And then we get a real project in Shanghai. It's a pedestrian bridge. This is the photo of bird view. This is Paul, and the bridge is on it. The bridge is 26.3 meters long and 3.6 wide. And it's a solar arch structure. The arch spans 14.4 meters long. And this is a photo of the bridge after completion. The bridge was located in Western Bay Industrial Park, Baoshan District, Shanghai. It was completed on January 2019. Was said the world's largest concrete 3D printing pedestrian bridge. This is the night view of the bridge. All of the components of this bridge are printed with 2 sets of robotic printing system in 450 hours. Compared with conventional bridge of similar size, its cost is only 2/3 of conventional one. This is mainly because the printing and the construction of the bridge did not use any templates or reinforced bars, saving cost significantly. This is a detail of the bridge. After completion, this project was reported by more than 100 media, including CNN, CCTV, and so on. Also get many awards. And after that project, we also have the chance to get another project to printing a house for Kenya low-income family. In this project, we have independently researched and developed 2 systems. One of them is movable platform of robotic 3D printing in concrete. And another system is rapid construction system for a concrete house. And recently, the 2 technology achievements have been successfully applied in the actual printing and construction of a model house for Kenya. This model house is located in the experimental base of Tsinghua University of Wuxi. The screen shows the first system. To watch a short video. The mobile platform contains a mobile robotic arm with 3D printing device, a rail with mobile lift platform, and a dragon suspending platform, and so on. In the 3D printing device, robotic arm and printing front end are installed and designed to be movable on the lift platform. The printing material, the appending machine, the steering and pumper all-in-one machine, and the control equipment, on the other hand, are installed on the dragon suspending platform. The printing platform requires only 2 persons operating, and it reduced the human input in the printing and construction process to a minimum. This printing platform enables a direct on-site printing of all bases, walls, and roof, resulting in a rapid construction at a low cost. And after test of this mechanical system, we start printing the house, the model house. Let's see a video. This is in the process of construction. The machine, the system start to print it, the base. The robotic arm, in fact, have 6 axes, and added the rail and the platform. In fact, now it has 10 axes. The lift platform rising and printing the high part of the building. Even in the in the night, it could continue to print. It's a photo of night construction. And another system is a rapid construction system for concrete houses. And this is a 40 square meter family house for 2 to 4 family. And this is in the process of the construction. You see the detail of the building. It's the completion photo. After completion, the photo of the building. This is the interior of the building. Elevation, details. We see a video, short video for the house. Okay. After this project, we get another chance printing a farmhouse. They call it Zhuan's house in north part of the China. This is the rendering of the house. This is the elevation and roof plan. Zhuan's house is a 5-bay farmhouse in which there are relatively larger than the other two. The three larger larger bays are to function as living room and bedroom with spiral arch as the roof. The two similar ones, the two smaller ones are to serve as kitchen and bathroom with a flat top. This is the construction site. Now it's under construction. And 3 sets of mobile platforms are being used in the printing of farmhouse, which are located right in the middle of the 3 larger bays. The base, walls, and the roofs of the house are being printed on site simultaneously. The exterior walls adopted the traditional local woven texture as a decoration, which was printed all together with the wall structure by the robotic equipment. The insulation material is poured into the gap within the wall, forming an integrative exterior wall system with decoration, structure, and insulation all in one. And this is the detail of the printing of the wall. This is an overview of the construction site. You can see it's a 1, 2, 3, 5 bays, 3 big bays, 1, 2, 3 big bays and 2 smaller bays. And the roof were printed aside rail. These are 3 rails. This is another angle of the overview of the construction site. It's a detail of the construction site. And now it's almost near the completion of the house. Here's some detail of the building. Yeah, this is all, I will present it. This technology will be used in Big Bay area and also other city and countryside in China. That's all for my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Xu. Really fascinating to see how the technology is moving forward in one-to-one. Our next presentation from David Graham Shane, who's adjunct professor in urban design at the Graduate School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation at Columbia University. He'll present his presentation title, Great Bay Public Space, A Century of Continuity and Change in the Pearl River Delta, 1920 to 2020. Graham.
I hope you can see my screen. Yeah, can you see the screen?
Not yet.
Let me see. See, I pressed the share button. Hold on. Share screen. Oh. Yes, can you see it now? Yeah. Okay, so I have a very short, first of all, thank you, Tom and Dean Maria for inviting me. And it's fantastic to be in such distinguished company and looking at this amazing city complex, something that I call the meta city, as well as being a mega city. And as Tom mentioned, I've written a longer paper about public space in the Pearl River Delta, who the various publics might be, and what kind of space we might be talking about. And I've used the methodology that I've developed in my books in the past and adapted it to the Pearl River Delta. In the past, I've had the City of Faith, as it was called by Kevin Lynch, as the basic city, agricultural-based city. Then the city machine, again from Kevin Lynch, as an overlay, as Tom was describing in his introduction. In the case of the Pearl River Delta, the colonial industrial system comes in, and also the national industrial development. And then what I've been most concentrating on recently is the meta city, or the mega city that is enormous city territory, 60 million, 50, 60 million people in the Pearl River Delta. That is really an informational unit. And in that case, I've been talking about it as a quasi-city, a quasi-object in terms of information theory. And then it's held together by computation and algorithms and so on that draw out patterns inside the texture of the city over an enormous area. It also includes mobile inhabitants with their handheld, which has become very important for the COVID and control. And also these enormous financial hubs with very, very high density occupation, which at the moment are threatened by COVID, but have enormous capacity for global logistics and financial operations. So I have these three different models that I'm going to try and project into the public space of the PR of the Great Bay. And this is a very, very abbreviated sketch based on the longer essay. So I was looking at the imperial city that was so important for the financial structure of imperial China. And in this city, the equivalent space of the Forbidden City, the Imperial Palace, was taken up by the treasury that collected the taxes of the global trade that came through, well, it was Canton, as the Europeans called it. And what I was interested in was the logical system that held this together. There was the way the city was laid out in the grid, the way the grid was transformed by its local situation on the waterfront, and then the way in which it related back to the mountains behind it in the traditional feng shui arrangement, and then the way in which the different sectors of the city had their independent lives. In the case of Canton, or in the northwest sector, there was a sort of garden city for the ruling class. And then the treasury itself, which became the British, when the British occupied, it became their administration area. There was a whole garden system. And then in the right-hand side, there was this examination hall where administrators for the government were examined. They had to stay for 3 days at their desk, and a very rigorous exam for the whole of the southern China area, that people would come there. And then in red on the very lower left, there's the 13 Hongs, which I'm going to talk about a great deal. It was the major global trading hub for the European nations coming to China. It was a tiny area. Only men were allowed in there, and only men could come off the ships. There were 13 traders who controlled it with imperial backing, and they became incredibly wealthy and developed these very elaborate gardens, which are on the two right-hand side pictures of this slide array. And then on the far left, there's the mosque that they were trading with Arabia. And next to that, on the top level, there's this pavilion, which is going to, which was for luck, for the examination students would go to the garden area to the left and west of Canton, and where there was a whole series of gardens that were, well, initially private and then they were mirrors to the agricultural estates that the merchants also owned. And they were built in the midst of rice paddies and so on, and the villages. So you had inside this slide, you have a kind of picture of an imperial city that there still remains part of it. And the tradition of these gardens, in a very, very strange way, went to Europe as the Anglo-Chinese garden, as the French called it. And then it became, in something like Central Park, the garden reform movement against industrial development. And you'll see it comes back into China in a big loop. Just moving on quickly, looking at the Great Bay Area, that we've been looking at Canton, Guangzhou, way deep in the archipelago. And the coastal boats were much smaller, but the European and larger junks stayed further out at Whampoa. There was a cemetery, which is the central for the people who died on the voyage out. And then there's the harbor for the largest boats. The 13 Hongs, that's the bottom drawing with the garden for the Europeans that was walled. It was occasionally set fire at various points when the trading relations were under tension. And it was abandoned after the British insisted on importing, very shamefully, opium. But it was an amazing tiny area of alleyways and courtyards incredibly compressed piece of machinery for administering, trading information and logistics, shipping things to Europe, mainly porcelain, silk, and so on. So this was but what I'm pointing to here is the compression that is inside this enormous archipelago, and the ships with their enormous scale of traveling globally, this tiny piece of machinery that's very elaborate. Each trading company had its own facade, but behind was a system of courtyards and alleyways that was the basic organization for handling this trading system. And the British, after the war, moved to Hong Kong. And so now I'm setting up a corridor between Guangzhou and Hong Kong. And the British trading company, the biggest one, set up on this little peninsula its own new base. And what I'm sort of pointing to here in the top left is the railway that came in 1900 and 1904, connecting Guangzhou to Hong Kong. And then the railway came in on the right-hand side of the slide at Kowloon. There was then the Star Ferry across, and there was a whole, in 1905, Chatter Square and this whole new administration center built as a modern concrete construction with a telegraph and electricity. And then there was the funicular that went up the peak with at the bottom, the trading city and the impoverished inhabitants, the middle level administrators, and then at the top, the most expensive housing, very clear valley section, if you like, cut through of this another piece of machinery that handled the trading. And it kept, despite having a lot of space, this compression of information and compactness as a tradition inside this enormous area. If you think about it, the Pearl River Delta is 400 miles long. It's like going from the whole of the East Coast, as Tom was pointing out. This is going back to Guangzhou after the railway came in on the drawing at the bottom. It's on the right-hand side of the old imperial city. And Sun Yat-sen and his son, Sun Po, he became the mayor of Guangzhou, and they took down the city walls and put in a highway, a miniature highway. They made a new approach to what had been the assistant governor's palace beside the treasury in the center of the city. And they made a central park there in 1920-21. There's the pictures on the top left are of that area as it is today. And then when it was originally built, it had a radio tower for a municipal radio. It had shooting gallery, and it had tennis courts. It was a sort of very bourgeois version of Central Park. Sun Po studied at Berkeley and at Columbia, and so was very up on the Western planning methods of the time. And Sun Yat-sen's memorial, of course, was built on axis behind the city hall and on Central Park. And the new street was built down to the river. And so this was a whole new application. And the university, which is the white building on the right, in the middle, that was built where the examination hall had been for the administration. And this is just looking at the bottom right. The waterfront still had all the sampans and the small boats to take things out to larger boats, even though the wall was down and there was a kind of bund built along the front. So the public space has shifted from the old imperial model to a modern model. Sun Yat-sen commemorated Lenin's death in Central Park and a Women's Day was celebrated there in 1924. So I'm jumping because of time I'm skipping out the whole Mao period. I'm missing Abercrombie's plan for Hong Kong, and jumping to the 60 million era. This is from Time Out, 2019, a really brilliant infographic where the population density is represented by the spires over each city. And the corridor that I was talking about from Shenzhen, Hong Kong, Duan into Guangzhou, that is the original railway corridor, which now has become the spine of the Great Bay Area. But of course, it's now getting replicated on the other side of the Pearl River. So for me, this transformation is only made possible because of the meta-city computerized and informational dimension. In the bottom left here, I have a railway map of this area. It's unbelievably complicated network that's, as I said before, stretches 400 miles. And then I have a map of the internet done in 2007, which we have with all the big internet companies and their platforms represented on it. And we inhabit both of these simultaneously. And up in the top right, I'm looking at just little bits of Hong Kong that in a way pioneered this very complex Newtown rapid development, Newtown rapid development and then these very complicated mixed use sections, I can't touch the screen, including beside the terminal for the train from Beijing, the high-speed train that's coming down to Kowloon, beside where the old station used to be, the giant mall that's there now with the incredible three-dimensional section. So I was thinking, this was a drawing for Tom, of what are the public spaces that we're dealing with. So there's, on the bottom right, there's Hong Kong with the levels coming up to the peak, and then across to Kowloon with the new railway in the dark line running across to South Guangzhou via Futian and Shenzhen. And then the old railway going around by the mountains to Guangzhou East, and where now there's, I don't pronounce it right, Tianhe, and then to Guangzhou and the old city of Guangzhou. So for me, this is like a little mental map. And of course, there's Macau. In my article, I talk a lot about the differentiation of these different pieces. But here, what I want to draw out is the 500-foot long axes of Futian and Tianhe. These that are kind of like a replica of the Central Park axis in ancient Guangzhou, now at a mega scale along these, and often associated with, well, in Shenzhen with the SEZ, but in Tianhe with the Olympics coming. And just looking at the scale of this public space, I make in the article a big differentiation between the softer garden of and planning of the Tianhe Guangzhou axis compared to the really quite brutal initial planning by the Singapore architect originally of the Shenzhen public space. But the scale is amazing. And then they are trying, Urbanism is working on trying to green the axis. And Urbanism is also, I'm coming to the end of my presentation, just this theme of compression, taking these very, very compressed public spaces with multiple uses. This is a gymnasium and community center, parking garage, and public gardens up on the roof inside a public housing project. Sorry, I'm going the wrong way. Where they tried to save space, the green space in Shenzhen. And for me, this is like a pretty amazing project of if the 13 Hong complex for administering global trade had been an incredible compressed machine, this is as well. And of course, they were involved in the stock exchange development. And then in miniature, also another heterotopic project that I really admire very much is the reconstruction of the lychee gardens in Liwan on the western edge of Guangzhou. This was originally where the little tower for the where the competitors for the imperial exam came for good luck. And they've re-excavated it and opened up the canal that used to be there that had been turned into a sewer. These lakes were redug under Mao. 7,000 people came and redug the lakes up, and then they've now been converted to work ecologically as well. And it's an amazing miniature archipelago that mirrors the larger Pearl River Delta and Great Bay area in miniature. And it's I find it this sort of micro-urban reflection to the macro-urban drive in China absolutely fascinating. And that's my last slide, I think. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Graham. Fascinating stuff. I look forward to reading the article. Next, we have Unsuk Choi, who's director at KPF in New York, who will present Shenzhen, City of Migrants, Creating Its Own Character. Welcome, Unsuk.
Thank you, Tom, for a great invitation. And this is amazing, symposium you organized together. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So let's see.
How do I stop? How do I stop?
Oh, can you see my screen, or can you guys see somebody else?
Story of Shenzhen? Yes.
Yeah.
It should be you, yeah.
All right. Okay, so I mean, everybody already mentioned it before, and then describe in like a Tom's presentation. We've been witness of Shenzhen growing last 40 years from mere small urban, like a small fishing village to amazing urban cities, as you can see from this picture. And as we talked about, the Shenzhen is really growing probably like every 10 years, the population growing rapidly, almost like a double or triple. And then as you can see from this graph, most of these people coming from the non-registry population, means like outside of Shenzhen. So really like where they born and growing up in Shenzhen is a relatively small number compared to people who are coming from the outside of the city. So also because of that rapidly growing population and then economy basically drove a lot of attentions, and also attracting very young generation from all over the world. And then not only that, I think mainly in China. So a lot of people moving into Shenzhen, and then you can see from this map, just simply they facing significant challenging as a city. We're just talking about the green networks and all this urban placement and etc. But purely they are facing shortage of land and resources basically. So you see from here, this map started showing a lot of near the coastal areas kind of landfill, and then the actually city itself is actually expanding to the seaside, and then they're growing a lot bigger area. So this is quite interesting. See how fast this city growing within this only 10 years. How much area they expanding to the coastal area. So as everybody already mentioned, this is always challenging for architect, how we can creating this sense of the scale from our traditional urban buildings and housing and vernacular languages versus also the density and also traditional material versus new material, also how we can replacement of these spaces and the buildings, and also how we can creating openness and the more embracing with the natures and etc. etc. There is many challenges we're always facing. So today I'm going to just showing two project I worked on in KPF in Shenzhen area. This is called Qinghai area, where one of these landfill area. And then we have two projects. One is called Honi Capital headquarter building, regional headquarter building. The other one is a Hanking, Hanking Tower, which is a spec office. And the other one is more like a regional headquarter buildings. So interesting part of these two projects is, although the two project has a very two different office tower program, but they sharing one common thing, which is they want to have a residential program. So when we get these two projects, we asking we ask the why, and then because it's very unusual to have this office program in like for example. Honi project is right in a central business district of this new developed district versus the other one is really like edge of this developed like a new district where facing shipyard containers. There is nothing there. So there's really interesting, and then that there is a both because of the city officials has a high demand on developer to accommodate certain number of residential unit in order to relieve some of this pressure on the housing prices and living conditions and etc. And then at the same time, owners are very willing to take those opportunity because of for the Honi case, they want to attract the young qualified laborers from neighboring cities like Hong Kong, because they want to draw those highly educated, the people to their companies. Versus this area here, they want to have this also sort of like a temporary accommodation to address the demand on the visitors or workers who needed to be there, because again, this is a new developed area. There's nothing to accommodating their needs, like living and shopping or like working. So it's two different reasons they had this program, and then we have two different site conditions that we try to solve those issues together. So I mean, we are not perfect, and then we couldn't probably solve everything, but it was very interesting way I can see how the Shenzhen actually forming and then addressing those kind of demand and challenges. So this is two projects, and as I mentioned, the Honi is in the locating very much like a central Shanghai area, and then there is a two site block, which is facing the river, and then some of this green, we already talked about right before about this sort of like a green strip we call, but it's more like act like a green park. And then, but mainly this is all office district area. And then versus the Hanking is located near the Bay Area, edge of this new development area. And then most of this area is a shipment area where like tons of this containers just piles up and then nothing there. And then this is a power station, so there's nothing really attracting this whole area for much. So as I mentioned, that this program demand the residential and sort of what we call dormitory, because this is temporary housing. So because of the Hanking project is relatively small, and then they demand more parking space because of there is no public transportation supporting that area. So we are just put together this as like one building versus the other side. We have a 2 block, and then has a much more larger program requirement for the residential. So we extract all the residential building, the program as a one building. So we have a completely separated 2 spaces, 2 towers. So the challenge is how we can make it this, 2 very different program to be connected through certain, design languages, whether this is going to be material, is going to be design language. How are we going to make this one connecting, or make some sort of connection, or we can make a, distinct to each other, or, how are we going to make it this one as a project and then creating space together. So we're going to, one by one, going to approach and then see how we solve these issues. So Honey case, as you can see from these 2 tower, facing the major, the river on the south side, and the north side has a, major like a city center. Is going to be the business district. And then one of the biggest challenge we had at the beginning is because of the subway is running right below our site. So even though the north side of a block is much bigger, we cannot really use most of the land because of this, subway. So originally we thought we could put this, original district master plan showing this one as an office tower, and then this is a little bit of a different, smaller residential / office mixed spaces. But we suggested to reverse, so office tower facing the south, so they can have a bigger, more usable land area, and then north side it has a more creating those smaller tower with like a residential focus program. So what good things about here is that, so this one give a lot of more free land, so we can creating more those kind of a pocket garden, and then more green surface like a plaza, which can be accommodating much of a residential need, and as well as in a sense of a placement. But versus the north side, because the south side of office case, because of it's quite fully occupied, we creating internal atrium space where they can internally creating those, let's say, activities, and then addressing all this sort of like headquarter activities, and through that atrium space, which is everybody sharing the space together. At the same time, so this is the plans, and then this is typically the offices. So we have the Scenic Elevator, and then creating this larger atrium space in the middle. As you can see from yellow, this is the lobby from south and north side connecting, as well as big atrium space. So this is also, we can creating a lot of natural ventilation through this space. So the Shenzhen is known for good windy city. So we could have a very nice and natural ventilation through this atrium space. And then residential building is has a similar gesture as if like mimicking the atrium space, but this is rather than atrium space, is more open toward to outside. So while this elevator lobby, so while people waiting outside the elevator, they can view outside, and then they can feel the space. So this is the view from the residential tower. So one thing we try to do is we try to use a similar material palette between residential and an office tower. So when they, looking from the residential tower, they are sharing same like material, yellowish, granite stone, which is a kind of a not usually using for the office tower, but that creating sense of solidity and as well as the contrast with the atrium space versus other core area, and as well as it creating those let's say almost like a family kind of languages, and then they sharing this green plaza in between the spaces. But so this is a residential facade. Instead, we try to have just a regular punching windows. Although this is more like a punching window, but we're creating patterns and then using different material color palette, creating those sort of illusion of randomness of the facade. And then also the entrance lobby, we have a very nice stone canopy, which is also a stone floor, is coming from the ground. So as if the whole tower is growing out of this floor and then creating those solidity. And then the office tower, as I mentioned, the mixture of the glass and stone, but eventually the stone turning into the glass, and then it became a total glass wall facade on the south side. So creating, vast measure to the, let's say, view from the office, maximize the view from the office. And then yet, when they turn around the corner, they can have the material, they can like speak to each other with the residential tower. So this is, and then at the same time, we try to creating more warm material palette for the interior portion. So a lot of wood and natural stone and warm color palette try to help whoever using the building to feel more comfortable and more the texture and things like that can be more human touch and feeling. So this is the atrium space with the scenic elevator. And so people can see from each other. So this is where entry lobby. And then when you're walking through and then when you're looking up, this is the atrium space. So this is a whole new project. And then at the same time, this is where the drop off as again, same as like a residential tower. We have a really nice stone canopy with a really nice calm reflecting pool, creating this kind of very Zen feel like space. Vice versa, this Han King project again is edge of this shipyardment. This is kind of a future development. We don't know it's really going to be happening, but this is a relatively small building. And then, as I mentioned, this is all container shipyard, and this is currently high voltage power plant, and then we have a small, kind of a mountain, not mountain, but like like green space on the southeast side. And then so really the south side doesn't have much of a view other than maybe you can have a natural light, like a natural light. So we try to focus on the more west and the north or east side of the view, and as well as we try to maximize the view because the client demanded, because this is a spec office, so they want to have the office to be equally divided, and then so they can renting out more regularly. But at the same time, they want to address this temporary accommodation on the top. So as you know, the office and the residential tower has a different demand for the depth. So we need to creating some very, let's say, unique condition, and as well as we need to be clever to solve that issues. So what we had done is we extract all the core element in the middle and then creating bridge between these two, solid program spaces. So, and the ground floor is mainly retail with the lobby only. So the purple is for the dormitory, or we call dormitory, but it's more like a temporary accommodation lobby. And then blue is the lobby for the office. So, and then this is the typical office layout. So as you can see from each bar can divide into two like a spec offices. And then on top, exactly same depths we can use, but like we can address a nice, individual visitors' rooms and with the small balconies, so they can have have some nice outdoor spaces. So sections, and then we have in the middle sectionally divided these two programs. So we have a sky garden where they can use publicly and addressing some of this public need. And then retail and component is on ground and second floor. We have a parking space and one floor of the parking below. So this is that. And then so our goal was try to address the same module, same facade system, but when we turning into the residential program, we start to build up these balconies and creating this facade as a like a more depth, so creating this more interesting texture, but it doesn't really like it kills or like it doesn't look like a same building. It looks like a same building, but just have a different layer and then depths of the texture, so creating more interesting outlook. And then the bottom of the garage, we try to have this kind of a green wall facade. This is, and then so the exterior wall is because of a neighboring areas, very industrial surfaces, like it's industrial neighborhood. So we try to use a more cool color palette, which is like a black gray stones versus like metals and more like a cool color palette with a little bit of accent of the wood texture, like a metal panel for the soffit. And then the two elevator lobby for office and residential tower has its own character as well. And instead of that interior, we, same as like the other project, we try to use more warmer and then more textural, natural material to creating more cozy and feel like human spaces. So this is the office lobby. And then this is a residential lobby, which is like still under construction. So I'm hoping we can get more nice picture next couple of months. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yunsuk. Our next presenter is Gao Yan, who's Associate Professor at the Tsinghua University Shenzhen International Graduate School and Principal Architect at IDEA Limited in Hong Kong and Shenzhen, and will present emerging pragmatic design based on the interpretation of Chinese modernity. Welcome, Gao Yan.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. Thank you for the invitation by New York IT. It's my great pleasure to join the group and share some of my thoughts and works that have been conducted in the region of Peru Delta. So I adjust my title slightly, as always happened in the last minute change, based on the practice in GBA, which is the Greater Bay Area in China. Very brief background introduction of myself, which I think is very important for you to understand the diversity where I come from, looking at the practice of urban and architectural design in a more pragmatic way. So I've been performed as scholars and professionals and even contractors of some of our work, as well as journalists so far. So my quite versatile experience give me a different angle to understand the urban industry and architectural phenomenon. A quick glimpse of the scale of the Greater Bay Area in China, the South China, which is the subject we talk about today. And if you look at population, is nearly 3 times as where you have for New York Bay Area, and the GDP is more than twice. So and it is growing rapidly. So you begin to realize the massive scale and also the very big challenge to the increasing population, to the urbanization of the area. One particular now, when it reaches a certain peak in terms of the land resource consumption. There are some scholars already, many mentioned the speed of construction of Shenzhen. And if you look at these photographies from the same angle every 10 years, you begin to really feel the actual power of the construction and the commitment of really developing the area within a short period of time. So what is happening, or what is the underlying energy and also the knowledge that empower such speed of urbanization with also a quality pursuit, as well as emerging or increasingly emerging knowledges and experiences. One important factor for that is the visionary leader, Deng Xiaoping, who actually stated that it will be the theory of pragmatism. Summarized, it will be a good cat, either black or white, as long as it catches a mouse. So in fact, that reflects the philosophy of the Chinese government for this rapid urbanization, really learning from different sources, really look at the outcomes, look at in a more pragmatic way, as long as it works. And in fact, what happened as Tom in his talk, in comparison to the New York urbanization, I do see lots of repetition, similarity, so it's not unique, of course, although there's a difference in different level, different depths. And so I quote 5 features summarized by Daniel Dolan in his book called Critical Theory. Comparable or to use as the key words to summarize or to describe what has happened and is happening in the Pearl River Delta area. So my lecture actually is organized according to these 5 points. So look at the first point, which is elitism. I really interested in the people who actually make the city, live in the city, producing, designing the future of the city. And apparently, the media contribute to the elitism, where our future, the younger generations, they begin to look at the heroes. They listen to them. They have the power of wording and impact to the decision makers and also the future talents. And therefore, the media, of course, also bring the horizon widen of the decision makers in the region, not only for governor but also developer apparently, and they're actually attracted probably most famous architects they can name in the world to pitch for projects in this region, to the government-funded project, apparently, having a star architects on board will be also a certain degree of guarantee of their for many reasons. However, through collaboration with Bernard Chimi, I realized that there also a struggle of the landed architects when the context is rather complex and for him to grasp, although his practice series methodology is heavily on the understanding of the context. And with that vacuum from this project, I can see his struggle and have to somehow take the legacy of his very early work, the Lavalette Park. regardless, or from my side, the input of the narration of the site context from the past to the future. It is so complex, and also the project has a very tight schedule, as you always hear of the nature of the schemes in this area. So the local and global knowledge and really the series about the context is a foundation for the pragmatic practice, and it also reflects, I guess, many truths when the foreign architects engage with the area, and where the phenomenon of choosing architects also changed when this project very recently awarded to a local small studio by Zhang Zhiyang, who graduated from Harvard. He opened his office nearly, I guess, 15 years ago in Shenzhen, small scale of a practice, but he won this a big scale project competing against many other big names. So there's the sense that the government is more practical and looking at rather than star architects, but the right architects. And this moment for us is quite encouraging. The second feature, which is the exclusion, and we all live in society where we belong to certain groups, and there's always a scope, a boundary of a particular group, either academic, professional, dear friends, family, from different backgrounds. But it's like the new tribalism, and we're living different tribalism, and there's a theory that the more diverse or the more multiple tribes that you sit with yourself, the most likely you'll become more resourceful and achieve what you like to, what you aim for. In that, for that note, I deliberately try to jump over different tribes and try different discipline, such as this slide described the international companies that I collaborate with for pitching the projects in China, most in the period data area. But not only for working with or collaborate with other architects, which I guess also become a very interesting phenomena. Every time you see the big competition came out in Shenzhen, you always see joint venture. And well, we all know that architects by inherently like to do work on their own, but the fact of the current projects in Shenzhen, particularly with the demand of both high-profile track record internationally, as well as the insight of the local contact, actually formulate many such global and local collaborations. In addition to the disciplinary collaboration, also work closely with operator, with the runner, with the stakeholders. Like in this project, it's a primary school project where you see the lady, he is a director of the school. So that project is actually also an experiment for me to integrate education of iMarch Studio from HKU on a real project where the director, she's not happy with the under construction project and begin to think about how to transform it before it is completed, designed by another LDI. So we were on board and we did research because she complained the lack of space, and also she wants to conduct very different pedagogical methodology. And one important or one fundamental discover that we, through the interaction with the director, is the timetable, the schedule of all the courses organized. And we realize that actually that is the key that drives when and where, who will be there for what. And that is very important code for a school work and operate. So we begin to interrogate that timetable, and also the director has his own idea to create non-standard kind of classes. So depending on which subject, the class might be shorter or longer. And then to understand how the space perform in the timeline is rather important. So we map it. We begin to see during the day how the space be activated through that we analysis will be able to understand the frequency, the occupancy of certain space, and the goal therefore become how we can equalize the occupancy of the space so that we do not waste a certain space during a certain period of time. And by in so doing, they realize actually the school is pretty big. Another important discovery of this project is we realize certain area has the potential to become a hub of interaction between the teachers and students. And we through the research we come up with an idea how we can create an open plan for the teacher's office, which used to be a cells, and teachers work behind the door and bury their head on the desk and work on papers. But in this project, we try to encourage more interaction between the teachers and students, and also amongst the teachers. So the demolition of a certain classroom in the hub area where everyone will likely come across through multiple corridors and staircases, and have this cellular furniture semi-enclosed space occupy the central open area, and the result turns quite surprisingly good, as it really changed the behavior of the teacher as well as the students. The students were more willing to speak to the teacher, and the teacher also be more aware of their behavior, will be visible to other teachers and students. So it is, to me, a quite successful experiment to see how the design, through the very small scale, to have a positive impact to the people's behavior. In addition to this engagement with the stakeholder, I also actively work with the industry, because we all know that this area is called the factory, the word factory. So there's an enormous power of production, making, manufacture, and there's also increasing demand of the application, the architectural application in the rural area. So that we understand actually urbanization as a part of, or a larger part, as a part of the integration of urban and rural. So this product idea is really taking the modular intelligence and to look at a building that does not need any foundation. It carries its own foundation. So therefore, you can easily build and remove it. The whole structure can be built within 2 or 3 days, and the whole interior, including the interior fit out, can be finished within 10 days. And that can satisfy a lot of demand, a huge demand from different suburb area. So the modular composition can become different size for even different programs, not only residential, but also other potential programs such as retail. And there's a lot of knowledge and research in this. In this project, we use 5-axis CNC machine to build the multi-tendon joint, as we really want to the timber module have this free of code bridge, so the comfort is better, and the assembly of the box has a more robust structural resistance to unpredictable forces during the shipment and construction, where they literally build a crane smaller module and combine them on site. And happily, we see another project after that residential which is another seafront area they use as a retail small buildings. And this idea of this prototype continued to develop into other programs. The idea really, we try to see how we potentially have this parametric kind of a digital model where control a BIM model, and then that information feed into the manufacturer, digital manufacturer. So achieve this mass customization agenda. So generally, you know, we have this abstract model controlled by the architects, and then the quantities, you know, all get this real-time output, and then even hand over or transmit to the BIM model, which will produce the as-built information for the manufacturer. So this is a general kind of one of the research area that I'm looking into, taking the advantage of the manufacture of this Pearl River Delta region. And I need to speed up in the interest of time. So the third feature, which I call it prejudice. We all know that many projects decided by minorities, a minority of people, including expertise, governors, founders. So they made the city, particularly those iconic projects. Like, I don't know, maybe you heard about the 10 grand cultural icons in Shenzhen. They all came out this year. And it's like endless competitions and juries from all over the world and in China as well. And this project being there for many years by Cooper Himabao, apparently decided by a certain group of people. But my argument of this project, although it is a great architecture in many ways, however, if you look at this photo, what it shows up, it shows this, you see the fence where prevent people coming up a user space. So they used to initially designed as a, you know, fairly accessible public animated space, however, it become an empty hall. And people take photos. And then the corner has a small exhibition for certain fine art. So, and so the problem is there's a severe lack of content, the curation. People, you know, build a lot, but then try to fit in stuff afterwards, and suffer from this empty space for years. Although it's getting better, but still, you can imagine, you know, 10 icons, which one is larger than this project, will take place simultaneously in the coming years in Shenzhen. What's going to happen, and what are the opportunities, and where the area, and where, you know, we should look at the resource should go to. So in response of this feature, I just quickly browse through this project, which is a recent winning competition by my practice and in collaboration with another local office. So it is a cultural icon, including a library and also a youth center, which has many artistic training programs and classrooms, after school training education. So this project, we spent 2 years before of helping the government to really articulate, develop the brief, and our research started from the survey, the investigation with the local community, really understand who come here to do what, and we find out that average people will spend nearly a couple of hours in the library, and sometimes maximum to 4 hours, and it's really demanded facility, public facility of library. Many people use it, not just to read a book, but also doing other learning activities. Whereas the youth center used in a different pattern, there's a opportunity for them to share some common amenities because of the time where people use it differently. So those knowledge continue to grow. It's rather complex combination of different programs, and we begin to analyze and understand there is some thematic relevance between the two organizations. They run it independently, but for users, actually, their experience might benefit from some shared space and programs when doing different, participate different events. So you can see that engagement of the users with the community help us to develop the project, which will then start from the content operation to inform the building eventually. The second last feature, which is great, so basically describe the commitment to maximize the capital investment or political interest. Like when we look at the new development, there always pursuit of GFA or density FAR, the value of the land. But it really depends on how we understand the value, and now the understanding of value change. So when we employed for this project in Guangzhou is a office building and developed by Vanke. They want to also create new type of office, which is more like a community for creative industry in that new urban area. It's like tabula rasa, increasingly built around it. So we initiate a concept from, again, a research of more than 100 creative park worldwide, and try to theorize why the warehouse type of office attracts a creative industry the most, and conclude into the low-rise experience and also the importance of the street, the communal space after their cellular office. So how to create a high-density environment like that become really the driving power of the project. So we you see the design process, which I cannot go into details, but just to show our way of practice to really not only stop at the completion of the project, but continue to trace the project to see how it operates, and then feedback to our design knowledge. So the building beyond our expectation, but what we expected is a way that people use the space in a more like a warehouse way, because we have this idea of more like a stacking factory, and you can see how it works. We split the cores and to open up the solid central and create this central void, which is good for the office, have the dual aspect, and also the ventilation as well as interaction. And those terraces become the emerging space where the office can expand their activities. And also the plan, the dimension design in such a way that they can flexibly use the space, creating the environment like they have for the low-rise warehouse, as well as some reserved space for the office expansion at the very top, and to prove it really works. So that's also the value the value that we achieve through the intellectual thinking of the architecture in different way. And the last one, the despair feature, where we criticize sometimes by the scholar, the big event, so they erase the land and for whatever. But this happened in the mode that for us when we erase, we simultaneously also build. So how we keep some memory from the past is very important. Like in this project, it's situated in the center of Shenzhen, the first developed area, and there's a lot of memories. We work with a curator of a museum, grew up in Shenzhen, and to really dig out those buildings and space that construct the memory of the city, and we see how the building create a platform where we can see those buildings, and as well as the respect of those surroundings in terms of circulation, and so it's become really a permeable collection of number of small buildings, but together it also need to become a certain icon to satisfy the political goal. So to summarize my presentation, really, I think from this emerging pragmatic practice, how we then to have the theory to lead to more creative and critical pragmatic practice. And this is what my PhD research is doing at the moment, to really look at the modernity of the Chinese modernity, understanding is that the process as a dynamic, flexible methodology that deal with different subjects. And that will construct a more coherent set of knowledge, enable professionals and scholars, bridging the gap between the scholars and professionals in this very complex practice environment in China. And such as the Banke Cloud, where I just showed that project, and those are the points which I trace back and to see how the decision was made. It's really non-linear, complex trees, but that there's a lot of tacit knowledge behind the pragmatic practice, which I'm working on. So thank you very much. Sorry for a little bit over the time limit.
Thank you very much, Jan. Really much appreciated.
Yeah, I'm done. Thank you.
We have two more presentations. Our next is Professor Jeffrey Raven, who's Associate Professor at the School of Architecture and Design here at New York Institute of Technology. And he'll present his presentation titled Cool District Hawk City, From Climate Research to Climate Action. Jeffrey, welcome. You need to unmute.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I will share my screen. And is this working? Can you see?
Yes, if you go full screen though.
Okay.
Go full screen.
How's that?
Yeah, perfect.
Great. Well, thank you, Professor Tom Verabes, for inviting me to this illustrious panel. I'm overwhelmed by the breadth of presentations, and there's a lot to sort of weave together. So I'm looking forward to that. Also, thank you to Dean Maria Perbellini for inviting me to join. So I've had the pleasure of visiting and working in China. I visited the Hong Kong area several decades ago, and then worked on a project called Project East, which is a European Asian Sustainable Towns project. It was a 3-year collaboration with Chinese and European officials. And we focused on new town development, where we essentially focused on new towns in Europe, China, and India. And during the course of that project, we were able to collaborate with a number of universities in Hong Kong, Beijing, Xiamen, and Shanghai as well. So it's been absolutely amazing to have the chance to get to know some aspects of this country. Want to talk about the sort of complex challenge of the sort of 21st century, how the cities basically are, you know, like the Greater Bay Area megacity cluster is confronting sort of 3 main challenges. One is climate change. The other is the kind of urbanization that is putting enormous strain on the urban centers, and issues around equity. And there's sort of a paradox between high density cities in the GBA and the kind of poor local climates that result from this high degree of densification that's happening. And so the urban design decisions that we're making today are going to have, you know, huge consequences on our climate for generations. And as we know through just our experience, poorly designed, dense urban environments can produce poor local climates. They're oftentimes dense. These dense urban districts can become concrete jungles whose impervious surfaces like asphalt can't easily absorb stormwater, and that causes greater risk of flooding. So you're seeing a massive urbanization occurring in this area. And you can see this image in front of you where you have population density that's global. And at the same time, the cities themselves are major emitters of carbon dioxide. And so the cities are sort of our challenge and our solutions at the same time. So the challenge, I believe, is to configure these dense urban districts to reduce the impact of the increased urban heat and storms that are due to the changing climate, while at the same time enhancing an equitable, high quality and low carbon lifestyle. So I did a sort of workshop at Chinese University of Hong Kong a year ago, and we sort of looked at the issues having to do with the sort of mega city in the Greater Bay Area. And I was very interested in this kind of issue around how the different clusters could develop codependencies and sort of sharing and synergies between them, because they're all quite different, as Graham Shane outlined earlier, and a number of others have outlined. Each of these cities have particular areas of strength and particular history to them. As this area develops more, densifies, there's going to be the challenge of essentially setting aside some land for potential climate impacts, such as flooding, leisure activities, agriculture, and of course, housing. And so you can see the sort of challenges in terms of urban sprawl in this vignette on the upper right-hand side, and the sort of more compact, linked urban clusters that you're seeing on the lower right. And I did a kind of quick sketch when I was in Hong Kong on scenarios for the the western part of the Pearl River Delta. And there is this area that is particularly flood prone, that hasn't been highly developed at this point, but perhaps it's an opportunity to set aside some of those zones for potential agriculture or leisure activities, and just to be a kind of a lung, if you will, for the overall region. As part of the current and future expansion, just as I had mentioned, the Chinese government is identifying different zones for future development, and this happens to be one that's actually on the eastern part of the Greater Bay Area, called the Eastern Gateway, and it's the zone of Shenzhen, and it's connected to the Shenzhen Fujian in under an hour by high-speed rail. And so this is sited beyond the current periphery of the urban sprawl of the area of the megacity. So comparatively underdeveloped for the region, this area is a key future node for the shoreline of Guangdong Province, where the new development is now required to protect and promote existing natural resources, including beaches, islands, rivers, and these natural features. So ultimately, and interestingly, the municipal government is envisioning this particular region, Shenzhen, evolving into a sort of coastal smart city for housing and business, as well as a kind of global destination for ecotourism. So our urban design studio last year engaged in Shenzhen. We actually went to China, to the region, and also to Shanghai. And we saw this as sort of a laboratory. And the students introduced ideas and techniques of contemporary urban design through the lens of a resilient and sustainable built environment. And so what were the components of this sort of approach? just as our last presentation talked about sort of a methodology, a process, this one also, we're very keen to develop sort of a methodology in terms of climate adaptation and climate mitigation in our dense urban environments. And so it's comprised of urban function and urban form, where we have sort of 4 key pillars. One is the efficiency of urban systems. The second is form and layout of the district. The third is the materials, and this was actually our first presentation talked about the sort of potential for concrete and thermal mass, perhaps. And then fourth is vegetative cover. And so, as the Greater Bay Area megacity cluster is sort of completing its first phase of mass urbanization linked by 21st century transportation networks, it's maybe a critical moment to study and question the effects of rapid development and analyzing and questioning the kind of urban systems and processes. And so perhaps it's an opportunity also then to propose a new vision for contemporary eco-city. And this is a diagram by a colleague of mine, James Lee out of Shanghai, looking at sort of beyond transit-oriented development into kind of transit synergized development, where compact TOD is powered by shared district energy, microgrids, and the kind of density encourages the reuse and recycling of district energy and waste. So it's really a great opportunity for energy transfer as well between different hubs, different users within the overall hub. So now I have just a series of elements that I've sort of questions that I have asked myself when, during the course of my travels to China, and also it's obviously stimulated by our discussion tonight. But, is there an emerging Chinese model for a megacity development that's different from, say, other megacities? And should there be one, or are megacities less about national traits than relationship, say, to climate, demographics, and economic sectors? And, if you were to fly over a Chinese megacity, would we be able to recognize it as different from other types of megacities? Another question that I would have, just that I pose for myself, is new cities versus retrofitting existing cities. And of course, this is an ancient part of China, as Graham Shane showed. And while much of the urban development over the next 30 years will be occurring in new and emerging megacities, how do we actually retrofit existing cities within this region, this mega region, so that they transition to low carbon, ecologically balanced lifestyle? So what are the kinds of technical and financial challenges that could be overcome? And this is something that we're facing in New York City, where we're actually committed to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2050. And yet in New York, 80% of the buildings that exist here will still be here in 2050. So it's really a lot about the retrofitting question. So I'm curious about that as well when we look at new town development in China. The other question I have is, that I've asked myself is around urban agriculture. Obviously, there's a sort of issue having to do with resilience and social cohesion and food supply, but food production in urban agriculture areas may only reach a small percentage of the number of hectares that are required to feed a mega city, the type of mega city that we're talking about here tonight. So in view of this, what are the sort of investment arguments that would be in favor of urban agriculture? Could we envision, say, a more robust urban agricultural sector to feed the urban population? And then as a sort of corollary to that, we speak about massive urban migration that is putting an unprecedented pressure on city services and infrastructure. I mean, Shenzhen is a, poster child of that. Should we be focusing on some sort of root cause for this migration, and particularly improving opportunities in rural farming communities in China? So this is an area that's really potentially quite rich. It involves heritage as well. So with this population migration, what are the implications of food production, national resilience, and the sort of urban and regional culture within the Greater Bay Area of Southern China? Another question I sort of asked myself is, what are the sort of environmental impacts of megacities? What element and factors are required to ensure that a high density megacity form achieves an ecological balance with nature? Say, can a rich natural ecology be present within a high density urban district within a megacity? Three-dimensional green space, bringing nature to the people. I know that, in Hong Kong and Shenzhen, there are quite high hills. So these become, in a sense, lungs for the region, but these are really important questions to ask. And then, what are the sort of value propositions for sustainable development here in this mega, this region, this megacity region, with sort of public health and maybe economy as drivers for this value proposition? For example, what arguments and factors could be the most compelling for the public and private sectors to invest in short or even long-term improvements to achieve kind of a low carbon food, energy, water delivery when we're thinking about urban systems? And what sort of co-benefits are key to encouraging these unprecedented local, regional, and national investments? Obviously, we are, and kind of picking up on what was said in the last presentation, the bridge between research and implementation. Cities can be nimble laboratories to test applied research. We do quite a bit of that through our urban design program at New York Tech. How can applied research be developed within research institutions, including those who are here tonight, and be rapidly tested and deployed by cities? So, what sort of mechanisms might be used there? And finally, my last sort of thought is around knowledge transfer. As these different sectors in megacities, these different urban sectors like food, energy, water, struggle to confront the kinds of rapidly evolving challenges of exploding urban population and faced with climate, are these megacities finding new platforms to share knowledge? Like the megacity in the Pearl River Delta area, might it have lessons that could be used by other megacities, such as the New York region? And Tom Verabis described the sort of relationship between New York and the megacity tonight. Might it be, what sort of vehicle might be best for this kind of knowledge transfer? Should we focus our resources on city-based models, such as, say, C40 cities or ICLEI or these kinds of organizations? Or can these city-to-city platforms shape national agendas and investment on food, energy, water, and national infrastructure? So those are some of the thoughts that I have for you to consider, or for us to consider. Certainly for me to consider.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
We have one final presentation. Thank you everyone for bearing with us. Joint presentation by Lishi Chow and Esther Lawrence. Lishi Chow is the Whedon Professor in Asian Architecture at the School of Architecture, University of Virginia. And Esther Lawrence is Assistant Professor at the School of Architecture at UVA. And their presentation is titled The Chinese Cosmopolitan City, Xiaobei and San Yuanli.
All right, thank you, Tom. We're going to try to stay within 10 minutes. Let's see whether we can do it. Can
you see the full screen?
Yeah, I can see the full screen, yeah. We're going to talk about the idea of a Chinese cosmopolitan city. Next. The irony is that cosmopolitanism is usually theoretically conceived as a universal, but in practice, it is always like more than not a conception of culture. It is a cultural claim. It is the same with the Greek conception of cosmos and polis, and it is also a cultural conception within the Confucian notion of benevolence. We're here trying to understand through some case studies of the character of China's cosmopolitanism, through its long history of multiculturalism, and through maybe after isolation of the mid-20th century, as Tom had outlined in the beginning, the new multicultural reality that China faces since the 1980s. The Greater Bay Area, of course, is more than any other areas in China, has been a frontier of multicultural practices and reality with its long history of trade and perhaps a distance from imperial centers. Next. Guangzhou is, it was and it still remains China's emporium, has a population of 14.5 million. The first Guangzhou Trade Fair was set up in 1957, and it has currently a GDP of about 341 billion US dollars. Next. We want to also talk about the spectrum of China's foreign trade and that, associated multiculturalism with that. And it really spans from young tech startup entrepreneurs to small commodities traders. And we're going to focus on more like the right side of the story, which is about small commodities traders. Next. That brings us to Africa, China-Africa trade. As you can see that Africa trade between China and Africa has been increasing in the past 2 decades, and Guangzhou practically has recreated the function of Chongqing mansions in Hong Kong. Although Guangzhou takes a lot of pride in its Zhujiang New Town as the new public space, but it is really interesting to kind of take notice of the thriving African trade, which created a surprising new urban condition. And this is, if you like, small money globalization. We're going to look at the situation through 4 case studies: and Beauty Exchange Center, Edong Building, Dongfang Village, and Sacred Heart Cathedral. Next.
I will introduce these 4 case studies, places in Guangzhou, which we believe show evidence of emerging cosmopolitanism in China. The first, the Beauty Exchange Center in the Sanyuanli area, is a building that opened in 2003. It is the largest trading center in cosmetics in Asia. With 120,000 square meters of floor area, 1,800 shops, and 300 offices, it holds the nickname of the capital of Asian beauty and makeup. It is possible to build a complete cosmetic brand with the products and services offered from floor 1 to 5, from product to packaging to marketing. The customers on these floors are primarily Chinese. The other 20% are foreign traders from Africa, South America, and other countries. The first lower floor holds a unique position in the building, the hair trading center. The traders visiting this floor are almost entirely from African countries looking for wigs and other hair products. The Beauty Exchange Center is part of a linear cluster of wholesale centers along Guangyan West Road in Sanyuanli. The area is a prime destination for African traders. There are restaurants offering African food, and some shops are owned by Africans.
The second place, Edong Building, is a 14-story building located right at the exit of Xiaobei Metro Station. Floors 4 to 13 are home to 89 companies, 45 of which are international trading and logistics companies specialized in African and Middle Eastern trade. The first 3 floors are retail, mostly for clothing and electronics, as well as cafes and restaurants, a prayer room, and services such as travel agents, visa consulting, and money exchange. The building aggregates all services and support that an African or Middle Eastern trader needs to do business in Guangzhou. Rather inconspicuous and small looking from the outside, it unfolds and seemingly expands as one enters. From dealing with shipping logistics, getting internet connection and buying a phone, to exchanging money, booking an air ticket and buying gifts for the family, to having a good meal and a coffee. Edong Building in Xiaobei is a real bottom-up CBD, serving the trading operations in Sanyuanli and Xiaobei. The third place, Dongfang Village in Xiaobei, offers an array of restaurants, African, Middle Eastern, and Chinese, cafes, bars, a fresh food market, beauty services, as well as retail, a hotel, and a couple of smaller wholesale centers. The village brings together diverse groups of African populations, Francophone and Anglophone, Christian and Muslim. Uyghurs from Xinjiang are working as taxi drivers in the area, and the Hui from Qinghai mostly hold money exchange businesses in Xiaobei. The 2 main streets are lined with retail, dining, and services catering to the needs of these diverse populations, while the village core with the narrow alleyways remains a territory uniquely occupied by Chinese residents. Here we see Hui women and their children entering the village. The plaza at the entrance of the village on arrival from Xiaobei station is a busy meeting place in the evening hours. Here's a shop selling SIM cards, phones, and freshly pressed fruit juice at the plaza, a view onto the reception in the lobby of Dongfang Hotel, and a shop selling clothes in the Honghui International Trading Mall. Here we see Baowan Straight Street during the day with restaurants, a fresh market, and communication services. Nanyue Straight Street seen here in the evening hours when Xiaobei is bustling with life, attracting traders after work for dining, entertainment, and purchasing gifts. Religion plays an important role for many African traders in Guangzhou, and the possibility of practicing their faith is crucial in supporting and extending stays or even getting settled for good. Shianchian Mosque, which is frequented by traders of Muslim faith, is in close proximity to Xiaobei. Notice the Chinese architectural style of the mosque. Sacred Heart Cathedral holds Catholic services in Cantonese, Mandarin, Korean, and the afternoon service on Sundays is held in English. This is when most African Christians visit the cathedral. The Mass service is held by a Chinese priest, while Nigerian Catholics serve as ushers and help manage the English Sunday service, which offers an important opportunity for African traders and their families to mingle and socialize, alongside Chinese tourists who take advantage of the photo opportunity inside and in front of the cathedral. A trader may spend an afternoon in Guangyuan West Road, then move to Edong Building, getting all the shipping going. After that, walk over to Xiaobei, have dinner and drinks, and on Sunday may visit the Mass at Sacred Heart Cathedral. Each of the sites is a microcosm on its own, but they are all connected, together forming what we may consider an emerging Chinese cosmopolitan city.
So following that, we'd really like to present 2 discussion points. And the first is a bit of a contextualization of China's multicultural history that started from the Silk Roads to 19th century treaty ports and to the closing of China, and then China and the era of globalization. Next. And that includes 149 years of the Shenbei people. Next. 97 years of Mongols, 268 years of Manchus. And the second point is about what is it that we can actually use to characterize a Chinese cosmopolitanism, in the sense, maybe we can kind of temporarily put up this kind of contrasting conceptions of what cosmopolitanism is made of. In the, let's say, the Western tradition and European and American conception of cosmopolitan city, perhaps the concept is derived and based on the idea of the public, in the sense that it is really an ancient idea, and Aristotle in politics already discussed the fundamental difference between a large family and small state, in the sense that a large family is a place where hierarchy dominates, and small state is a place where a public becomes possible, and therefore justice, truth, and institutions. And so that city tends to go for a kind of stratification domination model, and it's really based on intra-peer equality and inter-peer domination. And the urban developments tend to follow the patterns of stratification based on wealth, culture, and race, and cosmopolitanism characterized by ideals of equality and systematic or systemic exploitations. The Chinese concept of cosmopolitanism is perhaps more based on the idea of the family. And in fact, the Chinese we is literally means a big family, 大家, which has some kind of underlying assumption of harmony and control combination. And the urban management tend to kind of move towards in the direction of compartmentalization, rankings, and hierarchies, and its cosmopolitanism is perhaps more characterized by analogies of family relationships and strong micromanagement. I think that's all we have. Thank you, and hopefully we'll have some time for discussion.
Thank you very much, Esther and Xichao. I'll hand it over to Giovanni Santamaria. We've accumulatively used up a lot of time. No pointing any fingers, of course.
Tom, I have the hard job to keep people awake, but at the same time to try not to tire up more. Because I mean, it was a very interesting kind of pattern of discussions and stimuli that we received, and suggestion, and a very interesting approaches to the different topic. I mean, there is not much I can add. I want to some way open a kind of a discussion, crossing some of the elements and the topic that you touch upon, that you all touch upon during your presentation, and perhaps introduce some provocative elements also to this very, very challenging also conversation, which it's very interesting because it comes from people that have lived and experienced those projects and spaces that they are describing and talking about. And we can feel that, we can see that, and it's clear that that quality of that texture and that scale emerges from your presentation. So it's interesting how we talk about this narrative of cosmopolitan narrative, micro scale, bottom-up narrative that rise up spontaneously, and how creative design of spaces or creative kind of approaches of local communities can be in answering immediately to these needs while they are emerging. And that, I think, and Professor Xinjiao and Professor Lawrence, that emerged in very strongly. So I will kind of describe three different topics that I would like for us to discuss about accordingly to what you presented, and that I see topic that anyway I see emerging from your presentation itself. So one is about standardized procedures and cultural identity. So project at this scale, I'm talking about the project at the scale of the entire Pearl Harbor, and at the scale of the extraterritorial or metropolitan diffusion at regional scale. the project requires a long span of time, requires the coexistence and the collaboration, the coordination of different identities, private, public, institutions that are actors that are invested in this, investors that are investing. And often those projects can risk to be applied top down, or risk to be not sensitive to what is the identity or the cultural landscape that they're involving. And at the same time, since they require a long span of time to be realized, they often, once finished, they seem to be old already, or they don't have that kind of dynamism that I saw in some of the projects that you showed anyway. It was pretty clear. So my question here is these big scale regional oriented projects that are needed because we need to manage the issues that are systemic, as you said, that involve environment, that involve infrastructure, that involve economy, that involve productivity. Those are projects that need to be understood and approached at a bigger scale and in coordination among different entities. How kind of transformable or adaptable are those projects then to the change that while they are being built or while they're being realized are happening around them, or to the change that the project itself have initiated because of their existence? So they are adaptable to the kind of reactions of the context, or they're adaptable to the context that change while the project has been built. And this is one of the questions, the capability of a project, large-scale project, to be transformable and adaptable, and to react to the changes that the project itself created. Another element is the correspondence of the project, which is seen at the bigger scale as a unique or as a complexive, to the micro scale of a different identities, as I said, cultural landscape that it includes. So this a kind of capability, this ability of a project or of approaching a project, keeping both scales simultaneously alive and interactive. So the big scale of the regional and metropolitan, and the need of simplify, because at certain point, that kind of scale requires a simpler approach, requiring some way and some level of homogenizing element, because they cannot be that specific and peculiar. So how this needs of standardize or to define a fixed procedure can then be answering or reacting with the needs from the local. The third component is the ecological component. It was strong in Professor Reven's presentation, and it is a strong need. And I think, interestingly, Professor Shian's idea of having this kind of, he talked about the microcosm of urban gardens, right? A sort of idea of places where there is a sort of a compensation, a balance has to be guaranteed in terms of consumption of soil, and guarantee that there is enough soil left to let us live, or to balance and to take care of the pollution issues or of other aspects of life that are not related to productivity, but to human experience. So the coexistence of the ecological and environmental component within projects that are clearly based on economical, or which as this big project for this area, economical and productive kind of components. And I hope I, in some way, clarify the point of my conversation. I mean, the point that I would like for us to, and that you already touched upon in your presentation. I don't want to open 2 hours of conversation. I know the time. In China, it's still day. Here in New York, it's now almost 10. So feel free to interject.
Well, I thought it was really interesting, the last presentation, Professor Lee and Lawrence, because I was thinking it was really beautiful. It did bring the sort of lived experience of the city to life on a micro scale, and yet it linked to the older city that where the merchants are from the tradition, not the container port necessarily, although they're linked as well. And I was thinking, when I showed the big public spaces, the 5,000 meter long, you know, axes that they have made in Shenzhen and in I don't pronounce it right, Eastern Guangzhou. The one in Shenzhen, which seems the most brutal, has a whole underground library inside it and a children's library. And if you go there on a Saturday morning, it's like unbelievably active and amazing. And you would never think, looking at this ridiculous object, symbolic object, that it would have that life. And but on the contrary, the one in Tianhe or Tianhe, I don't know how you say, Eastern, sorry? Tianhe. Yeah. That one is landscaped so much better. And even though both of them have the Grand Theater, Urbanism, the Opera House, blah, 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 the one as a public esplanade and place that's used by people, the Tianhe one seemed to me, just in my experience, far, far more successful. Maybe it was the day, maybe it was the weather, maybe it was just the time I was there. Whatever you think about Zaha's project, that axis as a symbolic axis seemed just an amazing public space. And yeah, I went to the cathedral too.
Yeah, that's quite amazing. I imagined, yeah. I was actually exactly thinking about the connection between what you presented and what we're presenting, coming from different directions, I guess. But my take on the large public space is not that they are kind of public space per se, because humans are probably very low down on the agenda of consideration. It is really more like a conspicuous display of precious objects, which is a bit like it has a curatorial approach. It's in a weirdly curatorial approach, which has a really deep cultural roots in that. And in my book, Understanding the Chinese City, I've been I tried really hard to describe that. You know, it's a peculiar phenomenon. You build a city and people cannot use it, or you have to use the underground space, as in Shenzhen's case. Why? You know, one would want to ask, you know, why do you even bother to do like that? So it really holds a very special significance in the imagination of urban space. I guess, Jeffrey, you asked the question whether we should imagine or even conceive a distinctive Chinese mega city. I think this is certainly one way to conceive that the public space is actually not public space. And Ma Qingyun even said in a more radical way that there is no public space in China. It's entirely different, you know. So we have to kind of look beyond that and think about it in a more in a way that's closer to the reality, because we project too much of the concept of public onto Chinese cities.
But what about Tiananmen Square, for instance? No, don't roll your eyes, sorry. But well, what I was thinking about, it's also it's quite interesting to me that Tiananmen Square and the big avenue that's 1,000 foot wide that goes across Chang'an, that there isn't anything like that in the Pearl River Delta. There's no military parade street.
Well, that's what in a way, I think Guangzhou is a little bit special because it's very far from the political center of China. And if Guangzhou is to hold a greater political significance position, it would probably create something similar to Beijing's kind of political grandeur, and that's where the power is kind of embodied in this space. I would also be hesitant to describe that as a public space. Yes, public can go there, but then there's a limit as
yes, of course, yeah,
over there. So again, I think this needs to
in
be.
this regard.
Sorry? This needs to be kind
in
of.
This regard.
Yeah, this needs to be understood differently. And it's a challenge for all of us, really. The reality is so stark. Sometimes we use familiar concepts to describe it, and very often we fail. So this is really a huge theoretical challenge, I think, for practitioners among us, and also for scholars among us too.
Well, Professor Lee, I think that's a very interesting point, because this symbolic gesture is actually coming down to the real project as well. When we have a project, many times the client always demanded to be every single project to be, symbolically cultural icon of their building or their city, which is impossible, right? Every single towers cannot be, iconic building of the tower, but we always facing the client always saying, doesn't matter how big scale or small scale the project is, they always demanded to be, it has to be iconic building for this city.
Yeah.
So, I mean, of course we try our best to fulfilling those demands, but this is impossible. And yet, I think as you just mentioned, that this is almost like a journey for the Chinese people, or Chinese, let's say, after they open up and then they start to building up their, bring back their strengths and cultural proud, or, all those kind of journey, they try to, what, just Giovanni just mentioned about this cultural identity, how they're going to be figuring out the identity. So this is, I think, connecting to what you just mentioned versus, so Professor Gao just mentioned about this 10 or symbolic buildings in Shenzhen, which is going to be popping up, right? So those thing is going to be, I think, is interconnecting those idea, I believe.
And we shouldn't forget that Beijing kind of started with a 10 significant project in the 1950s.
Yeah, very similar, right?
You also noticed that Shenzhen is actually, the Futian center has a mountain in the back, and it's a bit like kind of a mimicking of Beijing's axis as well. There's certainly a power aspiration there. I worked in a large firm, perhaps similar to KBF, for many years, and in Hong Kong, and I totally understand what you're saying. When you're presenting, I kind of, I feel that kind of backstory that you're not telling.
Yeah.
And cities are often representation of this power we are talking, right? There were political power, and they are representing and exalting those power. Now are economical power and financial power. Yeah. What happens when that power is kind of as not that clear identity, or is equal in different places around the world? Because those companies, headquarters of these companies, are mostly the same everywhere, or the same companies. So there is not that layered historical need of representing and celebrating the power, but is an immediate and rapid and fast grow representation of a power that is equal everywhere. How can that become the place for the Chinese kind of society to be also as differently as it was in the past? Because as you said, it's a cosmopolitan society. How that society is different from the center of the financial district in the other city, San Francisco Bay Area or New York Bay Area. How can we feel that we are in a different place? How can we emphasize in some way that aspect? And I think, Professor Gao, that you try in your project, I can see that attempt to try to create a micro, and you also talk about a sort of cultural compounds of identity of our needs. And that, I think, was an interesting idea, the cultural compound. What
yeah,
you say? Yes.
Yeah, well, actually, I want to pick up a few points where which I've discussed, which also in relation to the idea of a cultural compound. And apparently we criticize, or we try to be critical about the symbolic architecture, or kind of iconic architecture in China. However, to me, I think we need to understand the initiation behind that execution of those iconic buildings, because one reason is to really keep the economic investment, economic performance when the government try to invest the infrastructure construction. So the jobs can create it, we can still generate it in that way. And also I think this is there's a deep cultural in meaning, because if you look at the Chinese characters, they're always about the meaning that the form carry, which then in the English expression it become a word of a symbolic. So to me it's a quite a neutral term, and I guess we really need to see that phenomena from different angle. And also, if you look at the comparison of Beijing and Shenzhen, I would say, although the idea of axis, I think it also reflects the cultural tradition, understanding the order of a city. Because we build a space with a hierarchy which reflects somehow a social status. And so the axis is really, you often hear by the government describing a city. And so it's really, again, it symbolizes the existence of the governor. But however, if you look at Shenzhen, if you go to see the government buildings, it's very different from many other mega cities in China, as they try to be moderate. They try to delete, those grand stairs. They try to make it more accessible to the citizens, because I think the model of Beijing is inherited from the Soviet Union, whereas Shenzhen is from Hong Kong. It's from a different kind of a social model. So you can see the very interesting comparison. It's in the culture of China, where we have this yin and yang. We see this the synergy of the synergy of the paradox. We really try to balance it. We realize that the necessity of city like Hong Kong, although it's a very small city, but I grew up with Hong Kong culture, which is in fact American kind of influence or British influence to the Asian city, to China city. And now we're in a new era where Hong Kong, changes its position, also changes, become different paradigm for many Chinese citizens when the situation gets reversed. And so the cultural compound, also I kind of, ask myself, although we all know it is something fundamentally lacking or missing, like as I mentioned in the content, also the kind of a where anxiety of the government to try to, people used to call Shenzhen as the desert of culture, because only 40 years city history, people desperate to build a softer power through the hardware construction. So the content need more resource to build up. Whereas it is also very true that the severe lack of or shortage of the hardware, particularly for the cultural facilities. And if you look at Hong Kong, all the community has its own cultural compound. It's actually it's a compound including cultural facilities, also like a market, like sport facilities. It's just because of the density, because the density where people just don't have the luxury, have the land to build multiple singular buildings. They have to, hybridize those programs together and make it, ensure a quality life. And it's a very, similar situation in Shenzhen when the density also increase. And so the cultural compound become a remedy, urban remedy, where to satisfy people's need for cultural activities, while we don't have that much land available anymore. So I think it's, in a way, it's also pragmatic. You know, it's not being planned. And even now we look at the urban regeneration, there's a tremendous debate, for instance, like the urban village. The owner of the urban village like to be demolished so that can become wealthy. Whereas we do not live there, do not rent a house there. Other architects or scholars, we try for keep them for a certain reason. And then the government and developers have different view to look at the urban village. So I think this is every single phenomenon we have to understand from different perspectives and try to see a more kind of a conscious solution or conscious proposal and leave space for the future judging, not by after that if we cannot find appropriate solution now, I guess.
Jeffrey, you were referring to that about living space and living like open room when you spoke. You spoke about the were you speaking during your conversation, your presentation, right? You are also advocating in the project like leave a space, leave some area for respite and.
Yeah, and actually, I'm very interested in this notion of preparing for the unpredictable, because I think that you know, the presentation about the cosmopolitan evolution of these cities shows that actually potentially the use of public space is going to evolve also as new cultures begin to occupy the area, and you start to have a really much more of a hybridization happening. But just beyond that, I mean, to the point of the sort of top-down, bottom-up aspect of decision-making, the mismatches also then sometimes occur between, say, current jobs even, and the future economy. When one industry, for example, anchors a particular economy of an area. And I think that, you know, kind of building on some of the points that were made, especially, you know, Professor Gao just saying, you know, the sort of top-down economic decisions can sometimes limit flexible development over time. And faced with limited choices, skilled workers will relocate to follow opportunities in this increasingly mobile economy. And so I think that that's really important to sort of stage development by leveraging sort of existing investments to achieve the multiple benefits, which is really the key to regional sustainable resilience.
That was one of the points I was trying to make in terms of how metabolic the project can be, how adaptable the project can be. I think that's also
and that goes into obviously ecology as well. You know, it's very important.
Right, because in China, I mean, the National Ecological Security Pattern Plan, that's an interesting way of preserving some areas, especially along the river basin and along recognizing the regional value of the natural armature. And I think that's crucial also, and that could be the thing when we were saying, what can differentiate this project from other projects, similar projects, can be the ecological component, the ecological DNA of the place, the structure of the harbor, the river, and the recognition of the value of that culturally, historically, but also in a projection towards how that can become the bone structure towards the definition of a new identity that is cosmopolitan, that is still kind of heterogeneous, but is rooted in some place, as rooted is a local. And I think in that geological aspect, we can find some kind of democratic and recognition, plural recognition, that can keep and save the identity, the cultural identity, but it can also project that towards a future that has to work, has to produce, has to in some way be part of a competitive global dimension that wasn't there before.
And there's another project that I think is really important that's to come, which is the city of Xiong'an. And Esther and I have consulted on the winning scheme, which is being carried out right now. I think the approach over there is almost like a kind of a direct response to your questions, Jeffrey, in your presentation. A lot of those questions that the city is testing. Of course, it's a very clean version. There's really nothing like the case studies that we presented, but it certainly is distinctive enough to say that this may be, just maybe, another version, a recognizable version of a Chinese city, even though it is actually made with contemporary technologies and materials. And that particular imagination of a city is could be quite significant. We'll have to see. I think Shenzhen is a product of a different era, and Xiong'an will be a product of maybe today. So China is evolving. So we have to look at this.
No, it's interesting because they actually have been using, testing out even European models again, with the Thames Town and those kinds of, which are these almost like Disneyfied versions. But in that, perhaps there's some lessons that they're sort of drawing from. I don't know.
It's a bit of a weird project, but Xiong'an is not. It's definitely not that kind of project.
What's also interesting with Shenzhen is that it is a very young city, but it's actually already, and it kind of like started with maybe being modeled like partly on Hong Kong, partly on kind of like a generic American city model. But then now, as we saw, it's already getting retrofitted. The kind of like public space around the civic center, for example. But then at the same time, it actually produces, it produced its own sort of like wild-grown typologies that also began to inform and inspire the architecture. For example, Urbanus has been kind of researching urban villages for 2 decades by now, I think, and their architecture is actually like really like strongly influenced by that, even though that the actually like functioning and the operations within those projects that the design are quite different from the inner workings of an urban village. But these are really like sort of like types that emerge out of the city itself and that are picked up by the architects, and that then also kind of like make it into the build up and the morphology of the city.
Well, interesting part is because we worked on the Shenzhen, last, almost like 15, 20 years, and then have like a 20 or more of project completed, and then we continue to working on. But I agree that, Shenzhen is sort of like outgrowing of without any specific planning, to be honest. So they have a micro scale urbanism, but as a city itself, it's more likely linearly growing because of geological reason or whatever the reason. They're growing more like linearly, and then build up to like one to the other, instead of have a larger scale like urban planning government leading those kind of a plan ahead 10, 20 years. So that's what I felt throughout this development. So it's back to the Giovanni's question about how we're going to leading this kind of the urbanism, and who's going to leading, and is it going to be has to be bigger organization has to be leading that effort, or is it going to be hands-on to the individual people, or we have to have this collective let's say consciousness of idea collecting together and then growing together? Because from my point of view as an Asian in here, and then also living to foreign country for long enough, and then approaching back to the Asian project is an interesting experience, because of I'm looking at the Asian project from outside, but at the same time I'm Asian, and then have a somewhat has an influence in that, so we always questioning about what is the Chinese culture, and then it doesn't mean you all of a sudden wearing traditional Chinese clothes. That doesn't mean you're a cultural person. So its question is, that the city doesn't have to be dressed up like a old Chinese town, but how we can refining the Chineseness of the Chinese cultural aspect into the modern city using modern technology, and so that is a very interesting question, and then how we're going to achieve that's quite challenging, to be honest.
the Shanghai architect, of course, Wang Shu is an example, but I think it's probably more interesting to look at the Shanghai architect Des House and Liu Yucheng and the way they do it. And he referenced no traditional architectural detail, but somehow, you know, like Sajima-like, and he's able to bring something out.
Right.
Quite excellent.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's going to be a new book coming out soon on Atelier Des House.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think this is a fascinating discussion about identity, which is a sort of brushstroke for all sorts of things that we're talking about, the character, cultural character of the Chinese as a nation and as a people, which is a vast country, and it's difficult to say it's one thing. And also that's equally in transition, like all cultures over time. The character and qualities of the urbanism of Shenzhen, which is super pluralistic. Just zooming around Google Earth, one will seem like it's a collage from different eras and different times. It has a multiplicity to it that's difficult to say that it's one thing, just like we're talking about the influences. In the same as architecture is a sort of agent for so many different agendas that becomes, you know, the toolbox and the toolkit for its urbanism. And if we kind of go down in scale for what is the cultural identity of the Chinese, well, the New World City of Shenzhen, in that sense, is like the tabula rasa of New York. A city of immigrants, and it's beginning to kind of have a character from all of these different kinds of ingredients, from larger urban planning and intervention to all of the more aggregate ruggedness of architectural projects intervening into the city, each with their own wishes and desires, and very divergent wishes and desires. And what seems like it's beginning to sort of have a genuine specificity is the character identity of Shenzhen people, which is a difficult thing to say because it's a little bit like we can say that there are New Yorkers now, despite the diversity of cultural and ethnic backgrounds. Yet at some stage, there was almost an impossibility to say that because everyone was so new to the place. Mm-hmm. And I think that's partly what's so exciting about in particular the context of Shenzhen, is this the multiplicity of influences and simultaneity of all kinds of different characters and qualities that are a result of that at different kinds of scales of culture in the city and its architecture.
Mm-hmm. So at this point, the role of a project at the regional or metropolitan scale is a kind of defining strategies that are open and transformable more than imposing models. And is defining what are the methodologies that can give kind of presence and identity to the needs and to the wishes of the people that live in that area, more than over-imposing model that can represent one point of view, which is not there anymore in some way. And it's perhaps never been there, but it's being kind of prevalent. So these systems that are coordinating different entities, and they are in need of something that needs to be seen some way from a far away to be able to see what is exactly the overall schematic development of that area. I think that's something that a project should leave openness to.
It's really hard though, Giovanni, because these big open spaces, these big axial spaces, they may not have life, but they live in our memory as a huge, powerful imprint. And then the grid comes off them or whatever happens, and then each generation makes different iterations and breaks it up. And then it gets reworked and re-inhabited. It's so complicated. What's so amazing for me about having lived through these last 20 years, like I've been going to China, it's just so fast. I mean, you know, we thought after the Second World War, the reconstruction in Europe was, you know, shockingly fast. We thought the American suburbs were disgustingly fast. Now China is like, oh my God. And then when you're there, that little project in Liwan that I had, it's so amazing. It's got so many different layers of history in it, and yet it's still inhabited and used in a modern way. Very, very complicated, very beautiful. So anyway, I don't know.
That's one of the ways to carry on the memory, because in the process of development and growth, some of the memory get forgotten because they were not strong enough. Some other are carry on and they take new forms and they new life in the current society. And those are the ones that perhaps are more characteristics of the place and of the need that place express.
Well, there's a larger discussion of the nature of memory in China, though. I think I assume that you're Italian. There was an Italian Jesuit who visited China in the 16th century by the name of Matteo Ricci, who actually went there and then wrote a little treatise called How to Remember Things, the Art of Memory. And he wrote it in Chinese. He was probably the first person who could actually read and write Chinese. And he could recite Confucius from backwards.
Wow.
Which was like his party trick, and it really kind of amused Chinese literati big time. So he was actually thinking that the Chinese did not remember things in the right way. And he wrote that treatise to introduce the Renaissance, the theater of memory, which is really it's about locating your memory in locations. I have been arguing that the Chinese memory is not location-based. It is text-based. So the Chinese take care of their text more than they take care of their locations. So this is really another huge aspect that
this is very interesting. Yeah.
Somehow is understood so faintly that we tend to misconstrue the Chinese kind of sense of memory. And if you want to argue that the Chinese have long memories, they do. They don't forget anything. There must be a way. If they don't keep the buildings, there must be another way to keep their memory. So that's a much deeper, it's really interesting question. Like if you're, are interested in understanding China at all, and this is certainly one of the biggest issues of a culture, and that's related to how the language is constructed and how the culture takes care of its text, calligraphy, rewriting, re-editioning, and not so much exclusively invested in the relic, which is a very kind of.
But that's so interesting you talk about that, because it's obvious, it seems true what you say, because of the fact that unlike many, Western capitals, they have sort of layered on top layers and layers of history that preserve the cathedral, that preserve the palace, that preserve Versailles. All these are preserved, even with after revolutions or after new regimes come in, they still keep them, right? But there's sort of this interesting thing that we see in China, where there's this sort of real yearning for some sort of a romantic connection to iconography that maybe is, there was a picture of those three young women who were in front of the Sacred Heart Church, right? They were taking photographs. Why? Because it's this sort of icon. And, you go to parts of capitals, or you go to other places in Europe, and there's just like this incredible magnetism for this. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Well, this is something that I would describe as figuration, which is a feature of the language, because the alphabet does not hold the image. Chinese does. So it is really a kind of image-based text that has a greater ability to hold memory. This is Matteo Ricci's trick that he thought that he could actually imagine these locations of words. And he told the Chinese that if you actually remember these locations like words, then you are able to remember a long text. So that is, to me, something, I mean, this is really, this is no, we probably don't have time to unfold that, but certainly in my book, Understanding the Chinese City, I've really discussed it extensively. It is, I think, the lack of the alphabet's lack of image that kind of channeled memory into the relic, in the sense that if you lose the relic, you lose your memory.
Right.
In Chinese, it's not like that. There's a long committed tradition to keep its ancient text, and the Chinese collection of text is enormous. It's just really unheard of. So it's really about poems and, so that works with some relics. I'm not saying that there's no relics in China, but it's not exclusively invested in the relic.
Professor Lee, what about those amazing incised stones in the Confucian temples with the map of Suzhou, or with every canal?
But do you know that's not really preserved, and because people do rubbings all the time. Each time you do a rubbing, it's a kind of damage to the stone. But the rubbings, to me, are equally valuable than this as the stone. The rubbing,
no. But what I was thinking about was the land division and geomancy, the way they divided the land and kept record.
Yeah.
That had a kind of visual component in when they made a city plan like that. I was I mean, it was from 1100. It was like unbelievable stone that I saw. Yeah. And I know they rub them and they get weak, but it's still every canal and every subdivision. That's another memory system.
It's interesting. It's a combination of abstraction and figure, in the sense that buildings are actually represented as elevations on the plan, so that you don't lose the figure. In a way, I think the Chinese would have some problem with orthographic projection of plans because it's so abstract, whilst the Western mind has no problem with that at all, because I think of the alphabet and the phonetic language is already an abstraction. So
it's interesting how this conversation goes into anthropology. Then
I have to read your book. That's all. I have to read your book.
It's very interesting. But I will say, Tom, what do you think? If we don't have any further comment,
we're actually an hour and a half over what we intended to, which suggests a few things, that the content that you've all presented is so fantastic, and it's kept us all here for this long. And I'm really grateful for everybody's contribution and for your time, and as well for all our students and public who've joined us. And also to Giovanni, of course, for your moderation, and to Dean Maria Perbellini for introducing the event and for the support for the event. So we're grateful really for, it sounds like we're cutting things off, which we sadly are. I would love to do a follow-up sometime.
We need a second appointment, Tom, like this.
I think we'll have to do a follow-up sometime very soon.
Conversation on.
Yeah, maybe with the flip of a lot more discussion. I would love to chat for another 2 hours, but I think we'll sort of slowly fade. Perhaps those in the East will be, sort of really awake by then. So, thank you so much. It's been really an incredibly informative time. I hope our public here and our students have enjoyed this, dense with information. Grateful for your presence and for the time commitment. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Congratulations. Yeah,
Thank you.
great.
Thank you all of you. Thank you, Tom, for organizing this. Thank you so much. Thank you to all the students.
Thank you all. Have a good night.
The best.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks. Been wonderful.
We'll be in touch very soon. Let's
follow this up. It's great to see you, Tom. It's been a long time.
It is a long time. Let's we'll try to catch up and aim to catch up in person hopefully soon.
I know that now there's no time zone difference. We should do.
That's right.
Thank you, Professor Lee.
Bye.